T. It's in the name.
Welcome into the Helping Healing Humor with Ben and Travis podcast. On today's episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between low self-esteem and humility. And I certainly need that conversation, as I'm sure there are others out there who do. And if you don't, you can take the information and help everybody else understand it. But we'll get to that conversation on St. Patty's Day right after this important new message. So hang on. Before we get started, we wanted to tell you about a project that's really close to our heart. We have written a brand new children's book called The Adventures of Ben and Travis and the Divided Kingdom. This story uses adventure, humor, and imagination to help kids process some really big feelings that often come with divorce. It gives families a way to start honest conversations and helps kids know they're not alone. If you're a parent, grandparent, teacher, or church leader walking alongside a child through a season like this book could be a helpful resource. You can pre-order your copy now at benandtravis.com/books. That's The Adventures of Ben and Travis and the Divided Kingdom, available for pre-order today at benandtravis.com/books. I'm Travis Creasy, the pulpit minister at Westgate Church of Christ in the southeast corner, Dothan, Alabama. That is Ben Hayes, all-pro counselor, preacher at Highland Park Church of Christ, hanging out at Mars Hill Bible School, all the way up there in northwest corner of Alabama. Ben, how's it going, man?
I'm good, and I feel like today we all have something in common, and that is that the whole nation had storms that rolled across last night. I guess when you hear this, it'll be 2 nights ago, but we looked at the map, and from the tip of Louisiana all the way to Nova Scotia, there was a line of storms that was coming all the way through. So I'm sure you're still recovering from lack of sleep, just like I am. You might not be, because you probably just hunkered down in the basement somewhere and were fine. But I had to go across the street to somebody's basement. Other than that, I'm doing okay today. So
yeah, our lines down here come about 3 hours behind y'all's.
Ours, yeah.
So it's like 4 a.m. I'm like awake looking at the, thankfully everything was downgraded. It is getting colder. There will be a freeze warning the morning before this comes out, or while it comes out. But nonetheless, it's been kind of crazy, bonkers. You know, it's kind of one of those things that everybody's like, oh, don't let the warm fool you. There's at least one more cold snap coming through, and I guess I'm hoping that this is the case.
And I'm hoping it warms up, because I'm heading your way this weekend,
yes,
and I'm really excited to come hang out in Dothan for a couple of days and then go to the beach. And I hope it's warm. I'm not a warm weather guy, but if I'm going to go to the beach, I'd prefer it not be freezing cold. So
I think we're going to get it all out of the way maybe earlier, just before you get here. I think it'll move on out and warm on up. It is St. Patrick's Day, which for Whitney and I, we got engaged, the most romantic date you could possibly find. We got engaged on St. Patrick's Day, 19 years ago at Camp Naotti, which is also, super romantic place to get engaged at out there on the pier. Almost fell off into Lake Gunnersville. Thankfully, that didn't happen, but it would have been a good story now. At the time, it probably wouldn't have been all that fun. But
if I didn't know you any better, I would think she must have been drunk to have said yes. But
exactly.
Y'all, I know better than that. You guys don't do those things, but St. Patty's Day, that would make sense.
Yeah, that would line up. But nonetheless, talking about the humility that I received, I think that's one of the most humbling. Even when they say yes, which I think is probably a high percentage of the time, Ben, but both you and I have been through the engagement process, and it takes a little humility there. You kind of put yourself out there. Hey, you think you could spend the rest of your life with me? And kind of a tense moment, no matter how confident you may be in it.
That's so true. And just the humility it takes from day one to however many days you get to be married. It's a humbling process all along the way. Then you introduce kids, and it gets even more humbling. And, life just can kind of throw that at you. And so we kind of did something yesterday, and I had some people just talk about how meaningful some of the things were that we talked about. And it kind of came from the story of when John the Baptist was approached by his disciples, and they're a little concerned because there's more people going out to Jesus than to him. And in that moment, they're expressing that concern, and just kind of talked a little bit about the difference that we see in John the Baptist. I don't think anybody would read the story of John the Baptist and think he was a guy that was lacking confidence, that he was lacking self-esteem, and yet there was a lot of humility with him. And so, like, what is the difference in that? And when we think about self-esteem, a lot of times we think about just the way we picture ourselves, the way we look at ourselves, and humility is sort of, I don't know, when you hear the word humility, Travis, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? I mean, what is it you think about when you think that we're supposed to be humble?
I think you hit it. I think it's the confident. Where is your confidence? I think I mentioned yesterday in my sermon, mention it quite often, probably a little too much, but just the difference in my ministry when I finally realized it's God who gives the increase. It's very easy, and I still struggle with that. Very easy to think, well, nobody's responding physically. We offer the invitation, people don't come down, and you get in a long streak where people don't seem to be responding. But the beauty of Christianity is, if it's not of a public nature, they can respond right where they're sitting because they have access to the Father and all that stuff. But just a game changer when your confidence is in God. And so I guess I would start there. I'm confident in God that regardless, I want to do the best because he's going to take care of it. I want to do the best I can.
Yeah.
And then leave it up to him. And really his convicting people is a lot longer lasting than any eloquent thing that I could say that might convict people.
Yeah. And like in this story where they come to John, it almost seems like a lack of self-confidence for the people who are coming, lack of self-esteem, because they're like, what are we going to do? He's taking our people, and I think sometimes we do that within churches and ministries and other things. It's like, well, what are we going to do? There's more people going to that church than are coming to our church. And sometimes what we don't realize is, God's working in both of those places. And I'm not in competition with other churches, the Lord's people. I'm doing what we do. We teach, we preach, we plant seeds, we water seeds. We let God give the increase. And sometimes he's going to increase where we are, and sometimes he's going to increase somewhere else. And so low self-esteem sort of seems to produce that fear where humility, knowing, like what you said, knowing that God is the one doing this, God is the one giving the increase, and that produces confidence in what I do because it's not all riding on me. It's not all up to me. And
how wonderful of a gift is that we give. I think even sometimes with staff, it can be different. Somebody else, if Will preaches and there are people who Will has a unique relationship, his own unique presentation of the gospel that touches folks and challenges them and moves them in a way that you do differently. And it can even be, they hear you quite often. That's your job, is to preach. Yeah. And a different voice can say something. I know in coaching, like I've had parents come to me and go, hey, could you say this? Because for some odd reason, they listen to you on this. And it's the same way with my kids. You can say something to them as their quasi cousin / uncle, that they're going to hear differently because you said it. And I think there's a confidence that I don't have to take that as a negative or a shot at me if someone else can reach somebody in a different way. And we all have our favorite preachers and our favorite teachers and our favorite speakers, and they can say, kind of get at the same point from a different way, and it might hit somebody differently. And really, instead of getting jealous of that or envious of that, or to the point it consumes us to where, well, I'm not going to preach anymore. That's a confidence in God that God's using Will to reach the people he's reaching. God's using Ben to reach the people he's reaching, and God's using Lonnie to reach, fill in the blank.
I'm always kind of been curious about how people are, quote, jealous of their pulpit, and I've had people who, just don't seem, I've known people who just don't seem to want to relinquish that to anyone. And I get that that's their, sometimes it's because I, feel like that's my responsibility to be there. But I also believe that there are a lot of other people that can do it way better than I do. and like you said, there are people who can preach or connect with people differently than I do. And so I'm so thankful at Highland Park. We have multiple men who are capable, very capable of preaching the gospel. And they all preach it very differently. And every time one of them gets up, I'm thrilled about it because I know they're going to say something that not only is going to touch somebody else in the audience, but it might touch me, because I don't get to be preached to as often as I like. I hope I get to hear you preach this Sunday and get preached to a little bit and stomp on my toes a little bit. And so, I don't get that very often. Usually if I'm traveling, I'm also speaking. So it's a good thing. But, there's just a lot of things that we, when we think about the Bible passages that sort of encourage that, I remember Michael Jackson talking about Timothy and how, he seemed to have some fear, maybe lack of confidence. He's from the city that Paul was stoned and left for dead in. So I'm sure that has some impact on what a young preacher thinks. And there's several places in the Corinthian letters where he's, they're told to encourage Timothy. And then he, of course, tells Timothy, God didn't give us a spirit of fear. He gave us a spirit of power and love and of discipline or of self-control. And so, God, if we have fear, it's not from God. And so when we humble ourselves, you remember that, we've probably talked about this before, but that image of the Lion King where, they're in the elephant graveyard and, they've got Simba corralled and kind of got him in the corner. And, he opens his mouth and sounds like a little kitty and they all laugh at him. And he opens his mouth again and it's like this roar comes out. And then you find out it's not his roar, it's Mufasa's roar. And, say it again. And so you have this moment where it's not Simba's ability. It's not Simba's confidence. It's the fact that he, in that moment, is somewhat submitted to Mufasa, even though he doesn't know he's there yet. It's Mufasa's power that runs them off and not his. And I think that's what we can kind of understand and see about us is our confidence isn't in us. It's in what we know God can do. And that's where the humility comes in.
I think Paul brings out the idea of the ridiculousness of preaching.
Yeah.
We're going to go listen to this guy talk, for however long, but, nobody looks at that guy or shouldn't. I wouldn't say nobody. There are people and, there are people much more equipped or whatever. But ultimately, if it's about the person who's delivering the message, it's not gonna have a long lasting effect. I think both of us have probably had conversations with people where they're like, man, I wish somebody would preach on that. And you're like, I preached on it last Sunday, or I taught on it 2 weeks ago.
I have definitely had those moments.
Yes. But that's the thing is, and I think your point too is, humility brings confidence in God, but low self-esteem brings out that fear. And I've certainly had people, and probably one of the most biggest rebukes I've had on my walk with Christ over the last few years is you talk bad about yourself all the time. And there's that balance of, is this humility projecting confidence that God's able, or is it projecting fear? You don't want anybody, I don't want anybody, especially a person who's in Christ, to walk away from anything I'm teaching with fear. I want them to walk away with confidence that God is, I can't do this, but God is able, and he desires, he's eager to do it.
And I fall prey to it. I mean, like when I get up to preach, there's a lot of times, I asked that question of one of my kids yesterday. Did what I say make sense? And yet I had people coming up and saying, this is great, da, 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 da. And, even in my own mind, I'm going, was it, was it where it needed to be? And so I saw a really interesting quote from Timothy Keller. And I think I also saw where this same sort of thought was attributed to C.S. Lewis, but Timothy Keller's quote is, "The essence of gospel humility is not thinking more of myself or thinking less of myself. It's thinking of myself less." So spending less time thinking of me rather than thinking less of me. God created us good, and God created us to do things. And so I think that's the second sort of deal with that is humility looks up to God, and low self-esteem looks down on self. And I don't think that was the intention. And I spent a lot of time yesterday talking about it's not about lowering ourselves under people. When he says, don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. Don't elevate yourself above other people, but rather, you're elevating other people. So I'm not thinking less of myself. I'm just simply elevating the people around me. I want to lift up Travis above me. I want to lift up God above me, but it doesn't mean I have to consider myself as something terrible. I'm just simply elevating others.
Yeah, I made the point yesterday, that God doesn't need us to accomplish his will. He invites us to be a part of that and to buy in his will. God's going to win in the end, regardless of what we do, but he does invite us to be partners. And I just kind of made the point, he doesn't need any of us, but what if he had all of us?
Yeah.
What if he had all of us bought in, whatever that may look like? And we all have talents and time and money to some degree that we can choose to be generous with. And, I may not have a lot of those things. I may not have just a ton of them, but I've got some of them. And if they're fully submitted to God, I have confidence. I believe that he will bless, whatever you gave yesterday, whatever you give today. I have confidence that he will do a good thing with that. If we turn it over to him. I think of the woman and her 2 coins, and it says in the text that she gave more than anyone else because she had confidence that God would provide.
Well, and with that thought, these guys come to John and they're like, what are we going to do? And this is in John chapter 3. What are we going to do? They're all going to Jesus. And he says, well, he's the bridegroom, right? And, the bridegroom has the bride. And I'm just basically a groomsman. I'm standing off in the background and I'm going, it's his day. This is for him. It's not for me. And so the humility is looking to like God's will is going to be done, and this is his will, and I'm stepping back and letting him have it. And so instead of it being prideful and going, hey, look at me, or it being low confidence or low self-esteem and saying, I'm not good enough to even be up here on the stage, it's saying, hey, while I'm on the stage, I'm going to point to him. Like when I'm up here, I'm pointing to the one that is good. Let your light so shine before men that they see your good works and glorify the Father.
This is the day you've all been waiting for. This is the event that you've been counting down, and almost like to your groom bride, it's almost like they're getting cold feet. Like, we thought this was the vein, that this was the highway, and he's kind of like, well, it is, but this is the end goal. And similar to John 16, when Jesus says 16 in verse 7, nevertheless, I tell you the truth, it is to your advantage that I go away. For if I do not go away, the helper will not come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. And so there are all these shifts and changes in people's focus and perspective that most of us are not comfortable with. But we have confidence. This coming Sunday, Ben, hopefully when y'all are here, I'll be preaching on Revelation. And I'll be honest, I don't have a whole lot of confidence in my understanding of that book, but I have confidence that whatever that looks like, it ultimately leads to a W. God wins, and he's invited us to be on his team, to be, once again, generous with our talents and our time and our money, confident that he's going to have the victory.
And that's really the moral of the story of Revelation is he wins.
Yeah.
No matter what all this, figurative speech means, what it means is in the end he wins, and we're on the winning team. And I think that's where, the last kind of line of this conversation with these guys is, they're like, what are we going to do? And he says, well, this is what we came for. And so I've got to decrease so that he can increase. And humility is truthful. Like this is where I'm at. It's the ability to look honestly at who we are. It's not an exaggeration of our goodness, but it's not a denying of our value. It is just, this is who I am. I'm a servant of Christ. And so I've got to step out of the spotlight so that I can let him step into the spotlight. And really that's a process I hope we go through, all of us, every day. Obviously John's was, he was preparing the way for the Messiah, but we kind of prepare the way for him in our lives too. Like we've got to step out of the way so that he can step in. And, that's kind of what making someone Lord of your life is really about, is I'm not in charge anymore. I don't know that we ever were in charge, but we feel like we're in charge. And we're either giving our lives to this thing or we're giving our lives to Jesus. And so he's like, I'm going to step back so that he can come forward, and I'm going to decrease wasn't a negative. It was just simply a stepping back and letting him have it because he created me good. And that's the thing. I think so many people, and that was the one comment I feel like I got more. And you know how you feel like maybe I didn't express this in all the right ways, and yet this was the one that a lot of people said, this is the one that hit hard, was this idea of God created me. We're made in whose image? God's image. And then we're recreated in Christ Jesus for good works, in Ephesians chapter 2. And so when we look at all of those things that it says he did for us, and even, Philippians chapter 2, that we're looking out for the people around us and we see others as more important than ourselves. It doesn't say, don't think of yourself as important. It just says, elevate other people. They're more important than you. And then Philippians Romans chapter 12, a man must think of himself with sober judgment according to the measure of the faith that God's given him. So think of yourself in a reasonable place. I'm not terrible. I'm also not elevated to the point of God, but there's somewhere in there that I'm elevating others and I'm lifting up God, and you have worth. So it's, there's not when God says humble yourself, he doesn't mean think of yourself as someone who has no worth, but think of yourself who is
and
worth.
There's so much of this that is backwards to the flesh. The First John, where he talks about walking in the light as he is the light. Well, how do you do that? You confess your sins. And my natural gear is to hide my sins so that other people think that I'm good or religious. And he says, no, one of the most powerful things you can do is confess. And Ben, I know I've heard enough of your sermons. You've heard enough of mine that usually somewhere in there, we're actually confessing. There's I'll throw my hands up and go, hey, I'm repenting of this right now in front of all of you, so that you don't think that I am higher or closer to the Lord. But the amazing thing is scripture tells us that when we confess our sins, we're as close to God as we've ever been. It's kind of that backward gear. I said earlier, not that we'll be celebrating St. Patrick's Day like a lot of other folks, but that's one of the things that I was kind of looking up his history and his story. And a lot of what people have written about him is that his writing wasn't all that great. And I know that even Paul, right? The Corinthians want a letter of recommendation because in person, he's not very impressive. He's not the guy that we sometimes project him to be, but it was that humility that projected, hey, if God can accomplish it through this person, he can do it through anyone. It's not really about what we have. It's about who he is and what he's capable of. And I just thought that was really neat for St. Patrick's Day. When I kind of looked up his story, it was like his vulnerability, even through his not so great Latin or his writing, was what people remembered. And why we celebrate.
We've talked about this a lot. something I'm not a ropes person necessarily, ropes course thing, but Lonnie Jones, of course, you guys have heard him a lot talk about different things. And, I didn't realize this, but when you put a knot in a rope, you make it weaker and not stronger. But if you don't have a knot in a rope, it's not very useful. So, most of the time you got to have knots in it to either be able to climb it or hold on to it or attach it to something or, put it where it'll hold, up above you or tie it to a harness. There's got to be some sort of knot, some sort of loop. And every time you put that shear on the rope or that bend in a rope, you make it weaker, but you make it useful. And so a lot of times the things we look at ourselves and go, well, this thing, this is what's wrong with me, or this is what I don't like about myself. God may be using those things to make you useful and helpful to other people. And so, this image of that I used yesterday was, if you had this piece of art here in front of us and, somebody, just a shameless plug, Jacob Hennigan is a great artist, and he's the one who has taken care of our books, 2 already, got a 3rd one on the way. Wonderful artwork. So let's just imagine that artwork, he paints something phenomenal. And all of a sudden, the artwork that he painted speaks up. Everybody else is going, wow, what's some great artwork. And the artwork he painted says, I'm unworthy, I'm ugly, I'm nasty. Nobody would want to look at me. Well, who is that really about? Because you didn't make yourself. That artwork didn't make itself. Instead of running the art piece down, it's running the artist down. It's putting the artist down, the one who actually painted it. And so no artwork is going to go, I'm worthless, because that's a statement about the artist. Well, when we say we're worthless, who are we talking about? We're not talking about ourselves. God's the one who created you. God's the one who made you in his image. God's the one who's recreating you into the kind of person that he wants you to be as you live your life. And so we need to be careful not to run the artist down. He made you the way he made you for a purpose and for a reason, and he's going to use that to his glory one way or another. We have seen him use, Bradley physically is incapable of doing some of the things that you and I do. Bradley has not ever spoken. Bradley has not ever walked, but man, Bradley's impacted people. And, one thing you can do is step back and go why did you make me this way? Or you can embrace it and go, hey, I'm going to do the best with what God's given me. And maybe it'll be the thing that shines. And I love that image in the Chosen, where is it John the Less, I think, that comes to Jesus and he's really frustrated, I'm healing all these other people and I'm still limping. And he says, that limp is going to help you reach a whole lot more people than if I healed you. And I think sometimes we just have to see it in different light.
Yeah. And that brings to mind March Madness. I'm going to put the link down there. You can join us. And you're like, how is that? Because there are people out there who are walking buckets, man. Guys just walk around, they throw it up, they make it in. I guess Bradley is a rolling sermon.
Yeah.
He's never preached a sermon, never taught a Bible class. But people who are like that and similar, they're the best sermon you can ever see. We all know people who have been through it. They've been through as just about every rough thing you could handle. Something has happened to them in that way. And they show up day after day, day by day, praising God and loving him. And what a testimony and witness that is. Ben, I love St. Patty's Day because I love the color green. I love it just about in every shade. It is my favorite color. So for our fun question, very quickly, Ben, what's your favorite color, man?
Probably if my go-to wear color, and this is going to be odd, but if I'm going to wear a color, I like a kind of like a blue or a gray. That's kind of my go-to color most of the time. Most of my t-shirts, I want blue or gray. I kind of like it, kind of that cobaltish or royal sort of blue, maybe the Mars Hill-ish, color.
Ben Hayes bringing out the color palette. Things I didn't have on my my bingo card today.
So that would probably be mine. And of course, I'm a red a Crimson fan, so I like Crimson, but it's not like my favorite color to wear. So like even my Alabama shirts, I kind of prefer a gray shirt with some sort of writing on it. So I don't know why that's kind of a thing for me, but
As long as you stay away from that orange, brother.
Orange is not on my palate.
We can get along.
My wife has bought me orange shirts on many of occasions, and I've said that's way too close to a certain team up north of us, and I'm probably not going to wear that except this one time.
Amen.
So, what's your favorite?
Oh, it's green. Green is football field green, the Oregon green. I love the Joyrider cover. It's beautiful. Once again, shout out to Jacob Hennigan. Love the green. Well, Ben, I appreciate it. You just keep on keeping on. That's my phrase for this week. Keep on keeping on. If you're listening to this, look out. Soon we will have the Panel of Dislike March Madness Pick'em show. Take us on. As I said, I'll put the link in the description. You can join that challenge. The games start in earnest. I think they're the play-in games today as this podcast comes out. But then I think the 64 starts on Thursday. So lots of basketball. Hope you have fun. Love you, Ben. Appreciate it, man. We'll see you soon, Lord willing.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.